Hello everyone. We live in a world where we are constantly debating fundamental rights such as the right to life, the right to expression, the right to freedom. But today we debate a right that may be even more important than all of that. We debate euthanasia, the right to death. Uh, we'll first come to the statements by the nations who first legalized euthanasia, Netherlands and Belgium. Netherlands. What is your opinion on this topic?
In my opinion, euthanasia is something which is desperately needed in today's world. This is because it complies with the right to choose to die. Human beings are independent biological entities who have the right to take and make independent decisions. Every decision that a human takes in his life, how they choose to spend their life, who they choose to live it with, where they choose to live it with, if they want to have children or not. All of these are independent decisions. Yet, by denying them this right, we claim that we own their right to life. We claim that we own the right of their time. We own that we claim the product of their life, all the utility. I believe this is extremely detrimental and sets an extremely negative precedent in society.
Delegate from Belgium.
Well, Belgium, being a democratic country, strongly believes that it should not ban things unless and until they infringe on other people's rights. Euthanasia or the right to die clearly does not infringe on other people's rights. Therefore, Belgium has legalized it. Now comes the issue whether euthanasia can be misused by people. For that very reason, Belgium has put in place certain safeguards, such as there will be a doctor who shall be consulted, and in order to further increase the democratic move made by by Belgium, I would like to state that Belgium even provides this right to children as well as psychologically or mentally ill people.
Delegate, you just mentioned in your speech that that doctors are consulted before you being euthanized, but wouldn't you agree that terminal illness cases confirmed are very are inaccurate and have at least have only 20% of accuracy? Now you rely on that 20%, you take away all backup options, and then you completely kill someone. You and consent can be manipulated as well. And you mentioned that there is no misuse of euthanasia, but however a lot of people with mentally ill children call doctors in order to euthanize their children. What do you have to say about this, Delegate?
Since you spoke about children, let me mention that Belgium indeed has two teams of doctors specially for children in order to consult them, and it is taken into consideration that the child really understands the meaning of euthanasia, and also the parents are consulted in this case. In addition to this, I would also like to say that there's a team of psychologists for for mentally ill people and children to deem whether they are fit to give the statement for euthanasia.
Yes, but when it comes to things like vested interest, when it comes to monopoly, when it comes to extremely compelling situations, how do you expect any of these measures to actually balance that situation for better sense? Because when it comes to vested interest, so when you have a certain incentive that leads you on to do the wrong thing, I'm sure there are a lot of people compromise on their own conscience to misuse euthanasia very badly. And the very first thing for which you're advocating it for, which is probably the right to self-determination, the right to decide that you get to do what you get to do with your own life, I believe that's being wildly violated in this very same situation. So what do you have to say about that?
I would like to interject. Netherlands has addressed this issue when it says that the request must be voluntary and it also must persist over a long period of time. The fact that it persists over a long period of time ensures that this request is not granted under the influence of others, nor any psychological illnesses or drugs. In cases where it is made under for mentally ill people, for people who face psychological problems, when the procedure is carried out, two independent physicians and a psychiatrist have to be present. Furthermore, for people who are unable to speak for themselves, the legislation also explicitly recognizes the validity of things such as a will. This can be applied in cases
Sir,
coma or
primarily any person who is mentally sick or has some psychological disorder, major symptom is being suicidal. So if a person is suicidal, do you not think that person is definitely going to want euthanasia?
Australia legalize euthanasia too?
There are certain parts of Australia that have legalized euthanasia, but not the entire.
So what is the justification that you have for
They
those
have,
parts?
yeah, they have very stringent. They're very stringent on the criteria for euthanasia, and they do not allow for all kinds of. There are 4 5 kinds of euthanasia, and they do not allow for all of them. There's animal euthanasia. There's infant euthanasia, and there's voluntary euthanasia, and there's also non-voluntary. That is when the person has, in his right mind, signed a will or consent saying that the person would like to, you know, take this step in future if the person faces is in a vegetative state or something of that sort.
Belgium would like to answer this, please. Well, actually, in Australia, let me say that I do not mean to offend them in any way, but you're actually denying the right to people who are terminally ill, mentally ill. So, actually, is that not a breach of democracy where you preach equality? In Belgium, we actually intend to give the right to a physically fit person as well as a terminally ill person, mentally ill person.
But delegates, considering that this is an irreversible action, it has disastrous consequences. Don't you feel that certain precautionary measures should be taken to ensure that the person doing this isn't taking an action that might be detrimental to himself?
Like I said, there are teams of doctors present. It is done with the person's consent, and in addition to that,
Delegate, when you say that you're doing it with the person's consent, how can you be sure that he's not coming under the pressure of any financial crisis that the family would be put in, of
Exactly.
What about
As the
what about
delegate
the case
Sunaina
where these
rightly
people
put
are
out,
really
consent is often
mentally ill,
manipulated,
cannot
and
make
it is observed that
decisions for themselves?
when euthanasia takes place, it is hardly ever the case that the terminal illness is what drives a patient to euthanasia, but instead it is found that 80% of the people opting for euthanasia are because their self autonomy is given up and is compromised.
I
well,
would like to interject. I think that that is an extremely misleading figure. For the cases reported of euthanasia for Netherlands in 2016, over 83% of the cases were for incurable diseases. The rest, 10% were for multiple pathologies, 4 for disabilities, old age, and the remaining 3% were made up of psychiatric disorders or dementia. So the
I
fact is that
second that. For
majority of
Canada,
the
how
even the NCBI confirmed a study saying the terminally ill would actually prefer euthanasia. So
Let's
I don't know what your
However, there
basis
are
is.
cases
Yes,
where the
agreeing with
patients.
the delegate of
let,
Canada, I would also like to say that palliative care is always there for mentally or physically, disabled people.
Exactly.
What
Mostly
is the
it
guy
is
for
We need to
palliative care? It
mo-
doesn't
hear
mean
out
realize
what
palliative
mostly
care
it
the
is
cannot be
that they are
effective in
I
every
I
case.
scared.
would like to draw on what
let's
Arun.
hear
Mentally
out
ill
let's
person
hear
will
out
not
what
be able to take
We
decisions for
need to realize
themselves
delegates
unless they are enforced by
delegates
their family
For that
members.
delegates
matter,
delegates
gone with some
let's
sort of.
let's hear out what the representative for Switzerland wants to say, followed by the representative of Luxembourg. They've been trying to make themselves heard repeatedly. So Switzerland followed by Luxembourg.
In Switzerland, we have allowed euthanasia, but not for people with mental illnesses, as we believe that these people are not capable of taking a sound and justified decision for themselves. So, how can you justify that a person who is mentally ill has Alzheimer's or some other disease which leads him to not even remember the thing which he said a few days ago? How
Sir,
can he make a decision
mental
about
illness
his life?
is a very
Let's
umbrella
come to
term.
the delegate of Luxembourg, then I'll come back to the delegate from Australia.
For the delegate of Saudi Arabia, I want to say that palliative care cannot be effective in every case, and moreover, it is extremely expensive to keep people under palliative care for a prolonged time. And it is also expensive to keep people alive when there is no cure for the terminal illness. And euthanasia would release precious resources to people who would actually live.
The delegate of Luxembourg just mentioned that it is very expensive to keep terminally ill people with patients alive. But also, however, when we look at the statistics, we observe that only 2% decide to opt for euthanasia, and only 1% of those decide to take the pills that is there for euthanasia. Now, diverting funds and investing in euthanasia practices, those funds could be diverted elsewhere instead of for this meager 1%. Instead of that, it could be invested in other medical practices which could
But
prolong the time.
delegate, for those 1%, this choice is a final choice. This is everything to them. Like, if we don't trust our citizens with their own life, what can we trust them with?
Yes, the state does not own
But
the
The
body.
ma'am,
right to die with
it
dignity
I'm
it
should
isn't
sorry,
be.
you
always
don't care
that
for that
case.
Children have
1%. They
rights.
are your
You
Children
citizens.
have
can't
the
you
right
can't have
to
all
live
measures
Questions
done for
like
only a meager of 1%. You need to keep in mind the majority of your citizens, and you need to invest for the betterment of their lives. You need to invest in medical practices that would improve their lives, that would improve the sustainability of that, and would prolong their lives and would lead to them leading a better quality of life as well.
So this is
But
exactly
delegates, the crucial question here is in a life which does not have any meaning anymore, where you cannot have such treatments. These treatments have been proven to be unsuccessful, and there is simply no hope left. If a person faced with such a difficult choice chooses to let go of his life, then who is the state to deny him that? Before we come to this answer, the delegate from Colombia was wanting to make himself heard. What is your take on this?
First of all, the right to death and the right to life are quite close terms. The right to death is a part of right to life. And since all of you are already speaking on euthanasia, it's a universal term, triage. Triage is determining priority of patients' treatments with the likely of recovery. When anyone is when there's a war, you always select the patients who are most likely to recover. Sometimes the doctor doesn't even see those who have a 90% chance to die.
Belgium
What
would
about
like to
that?
add.
Isn't that also choosing them to die? Isn't there to they don't even have a choice?
Delegate, if you trust your citizens so much with their life, then why does every single nation have such strict policies against suicide?
Belgium would like to add
suicide and
something.
euthanasia are
I
two
would like
very
to come to
different
that point made by
concepts.
Exactly.
China in her
I
speech.
agree with
Commit
Australia here.
when a
The
person
delegate of
commits
China, I'd
suicide.
like to say that
You are
Belgium would
asking
like.
in favor of
The delegate
palliative
of China,
care, then
the
how
delegate of China.
dignified is this palliative care? Would you like to be carried around by a nurse for the rest of your life? Tell me. Maybe people want to live a dignified life and die a dignified death.
Yeah, that's
Delegate of
precisely why.
Sir, I'd
Switzerland,
like to
So
mention
why
that
do you
you're
want,
giving
want to
them
make the
only
mentioned
two
family
that
suffer
choices. You're
mentioned
giving
that
us the
seeing their loved
option.
ones
people want to
burn?
live a dignified life,
You're
but however, the chances of absolutely dying by euthanasia are also not confirmed. Out of 108, 1,800 cases, it was observed that only 700 cases were effective. The remainder of the 1,100 cases which were put under euthanasia were not effective. Now, what do you do after you already tried to kill yourself? Do you go about treating yourself, or do you live with the humiliation and try to kill yourself again? Also, further, it has also been noted that there are numerous cases where patients regain consciousness after being euthanized, and euthanasia is not always necessarily a legal dose.
So
I'm
then how
sorry,
can
we're
you
not
qualify
really
that as a
delegate. We're not
dignified
really.
death? Because there are
Right,
definitely
delegates.
many factors that weigh in
Let's
on it that
let
definitely death is so sacred. Do you really want to undignified in this way? I mean,
I'm sorry,
it's
we
definitely
are
worth.
making euthanasia for them to for
let
security. Do you want someone to die in pain? People who have
all
lost
right.
hope, people
That is what
who are
palliative
on the
care is
brink of
for.
All
death,
right,
who
let's
want to
sure.
That
die,
is what
would
However,
be
by
palliative
rather
care
giving the
is
letting
option
for.
of
die
euthanasia,
Dr.
you
to
basically
Columbia.
die
promoting the
peaceful death.
idea of
There
not
are
being a burden on
already
your
Delegates,
family.
delegates. Let's hear from the representative from France and the representative from England because they have not spoken yet, and I'd like to hear their view also.
Yes, so I've heard all your points. Yes, people have a right to death and they do have a right to decide when they want to die if there is no solution to their problem and they are not able to live a meaningful a life. However, at the same time, if it is made legal, there is no guarantee that people won't use it illegally. That's my only point. Even if there are hundreds of safeguards measures, there is no guarantee that for every person that particular action won't be taken in an illegal manner. It can be by people in power.
Isn't that a legal issue? Isn't that the
Delegate, which
responsibility
law
of
has
your
been
government?
100% successful?
I
Isn't
have
They're
that the
not
To know
responsibility
about
of your
the
government?
also illegal in
delegate
most of the
There is
countries,
a
but
law
right
that
There
now
are
says
other
that
methods also like
now
France
already
has
exists
adopted
where
I have
certain
a
patients
methods apart from
question.
this particular method,
All
which
right, we'll take question from the international guest.
Delegates wait. So the entire premise of this argument relies on the right of self-determination, whether a person is able to determine his rights or not. Now, as Australia mentioned, that the right of euthanasia has been given to animals also. So, how do you expect an animal to determine his death or not?
Humans can very well determine, the doctors, the physicians, they are very well learned and they can easily determine whether a person or an animal is in a vegetative state or will ever even recover. The probability is always there, right?
I'm sorry to
At the
interrupt,
same time, you are
Actually,
not.
animals
recover
don't
the
have
animal
a
is
Here,
voice.
suffering
I
from
would
a
like to point
Will
out
go
that
ahead
for
and murder.
animals,
chronic
Murder.
kidney
Delegate of
disease.
Australia, I would like to point out that an age of concern dossier in 2000 showed that doctors put do not resuscitate orders in place on elderly patients without consulting them or their families. So how is that the doctors are completely aware of their situation when they're not even asking the patients?
I think that is a legal issue and that is illegal.
Exactly, it's a
The whole
legal issue.
But in judgment, there's definitely got a way in which they need to cover.
Also, the delegate of Netherlands, you raised a point that everyone has the right to
Committed you.
determine everything and what they can do and what they can't do. But however, that shows an utter disregard for Islamic for the ideology of Islam. That is that Allah has given us life, and in turn, it is Allah who has the right to determine what happens. Now, all physicians are placed
So we
right below Allah
cannot use religious sentiments to
because they have the
determine
right to
a
because they have the right to
biologically
save
given.
our lives,
In
right? And
some
now
countries, the
You
Those
delegate of
can't
people
mix
who
Australia, that
believe
is
in
how
science
things
and
religion,
are.
You
religion. You
cannot
can't mix
murder.
science
choose
and religion.
religion
No, but
over
those people
humanitarian
who
why
Don't
grounds
take
you said
medicines
you
then.
said
Don't take
You
medicines.
may
at
not be able
any
to
the
use
point of
right to
time.
choice to die, the
taking away one
right to choice
person's
to death
life
or
is
life
wrong.
is a fundamental right. Now is religion not a fundamental prospect and a part of one's identity?
So,
How
which
can you
religion makes
How
you a
does
Totally
physician?
Allah?
agree
deny
with the
that?
delegate
How
of
can you
If
deny
it is a
someone's
part
right
of
to
your
choice is
identity, how
fundamental
are
and
you?
see as the
How is
religious
the
as the
medical lab?
religious teachings which they are being taught ever since childhood?
delegate,
Okay,
if
so
euthanasia goes against someone's
Delegate, how does Allah give you the right to take
and
away
that
animals'
person,
lives then?
Okay, let's
That
not
is
Aren't
go
they
there.
also
lives
wrong,
also?
right?
Let's please not
delegate,
go
Just
there.
because animals don't have a
delegate
voice, you have
can
no right to take away their life. That is murder. Whether you do it for a good reason or not, that is wrong.
Euthanasia is also
Point.
murder
I think
as
basically
Non-vegetarianism
issued
is
by a
for
illegal.
Delegate
animals
of
Yeah,
to
France,
that's
you
suffer,
just
That
said
was
that
in
certain
taking
response to
their
murder.
the
lives for a good reason,
I guess I
it
think this
doesn't
debate
matter.
is
and
It
not
is
digressing.
wrong.
I
What
Can
think
we
about
this
the
not go
delegate of
to
digress.
religious
Australia saying
sentiments,
that
please?
euthanasia
I
has been
think
allowed
this
for animals also?
I think this discussion is digressing. I don't understand the relevance of non-vegetarianism to this debate or to
Exactly.
this panel discussion. Let's take the view of the representative for English. He hasn't spoken.
From a Britain point of view, I firmly believe that euthanasia is and should remain illegal. How can you how can you legalize infant euthanasia or passive euthanasia where people are constantly being influenced to it? In
Ma'am, if a child is
absolutely, I
born
delegate. We
completely
are
agree.
not
physically
allowing
or
infants
disability, would you
euthanasia.
want that child
Switzerland,
to
the
grow
law
up and live a life
I'd like to
in
reiterate,
very
people are not
But
influenced.
that
There is
does
a
not
procedure
mean
that needs to
to
be
end up
followed.
killing
The
them.
person needs to be competent enough to say,
How
agree to euthanasia. The family needs to agree, the patient needs.
Calling upon
Euthanasia
doctors
always
to
has a clear
euthanize the
process.
mentally ill children because they
exactly.
don't want to bear
Otherwise,
the
you
But if
burden
don't.
of
the
that, and
patient is
delegate of
not
Luxembourg,
responsible,
how
if
can
he
you
is not
justify
able to respond,
euthanasia
it's the
for
family
children?
that
Can I
decides.
know that?
Why is it always if? You can't have an if statement always.
Delegates, the member of the press has a question for you.
So you say that euthanasia should be illegal for infants, but the whole fact is that healthcare benefits, taking care of a child who's mentally or physically or both sick, adds up to such a huge medical bill. It is so financially constrained. The parents are the ones who have to raise the child, and the child will suffer throughout its whole life because of the disease that it has. So, how can you justify by saying that they should suffer just because they can't decide at what they're doing when they're a child?
delegate, by that logic, you should kill all disabled people as
Majority.
well because they
Exactly.
can't
Would
breathe
you
Yes,
would you
because
delegate.
would
they
you
You
can't
will
rank
not
would
It
you
should be
rank
their
take
choice.
away
financial
the right
value
to
over the value of
life.
The
one
thing
life?
that you're
Who has
almost
the
You
talking
choice?
about
cannot take away
children,
right
it's
to
a very
life for
different
Being
everyone.
scenario.
disabled and being terminally ill.
People go on to
There is
live
a
Just
a
because
difference
the person
between
long
is
being
sick,
disabled and
you
being
cannot take away his
terminally
life.
ill.
That is
think this
Delegate of
Even if
France.
it
question
does
has
not
Do
been,
you
I
think
affect
and
think,
the
legalizing
delegates,
the
I
usage of
think this
euthanasia?
question has been misinterpreted. Her question is not the implication of the question is not that you start killing off all terminally ill people. The question is that a person so drastically ill that there is no hope of coming back and there is no scope available to lead an enjoyable life, to lead a wholesome and fruitful life. In that scenario, does euthanasia hold true, and should this avenue be available to people who are in that scenario? That is the
Yes.
question.
Yes.
It gives them a peaceful way to part away from
Exactly.
life.
Right to
They
die when they
haven't,
As
choose.
honorary
they
as the
haven't
right
even
to
lived
life,
their life.
Already mentioned that
Self-determination.
that's not
parting with
it does
death
not
honorably.
You
provide
are
people
Why
not
would you
giving
want to
them
be on
a
your
with
chance to
going
live.
away with their life.
I'm
And
sorry, we
Exactly.
half the
asked
You are
time
them.
what
not
They
giving them a
what
we
chance
take
to
their
is
live.
permission.
No, but
We're
the
not
problem
giving
is
them the
It's
chance.
with their
Not
own
giving them
consent.
that right
It's
Permission
with their
chance
own
was
to
consent.
just
receive
own
all
create like
perspective.
Civilization
how is
and
that
the
how is
medical
that a peaceful
authorities
Doctors
check
are
choice?
not forcing
if they are
themselves to
viable
take
also.
Delegate
We
of
have
trust.
But
We
doctors
are
and
not.
physical
delegates,
How can we ensure
therapists.
that the respect for
delegates,
and
even someone like Stephen Hawking was supposed to have an absolutely incurable disease for the rest of his life. Did he not succeed? If he was not given, if his family, if his parents had directly determined that he shouldn't have lived, then then the world would definitely be in a very, very different position
Delegate,
today.
nobody is saying that once you're at a point in your life where you have control over your life and hence control over your death, your parents or anybody in a position of authority should come and decide
Why
when you
not?
need to end
If
your
that was
life.
the case, if that was the case, you say
I'm
like
sorry.
an 8-year-old
Till
child
the
who's
age
We're
of
not
not
18,
control
you
over
obligating
are
their life,
anybody
right
there
to
is
to
die.
the
quite capable of
This
jurisdiction of
succeeding
person
in
your
their
is
life.
It's
not
free
in the
choice.
right state of mind.
Obligation
Then
to die.
entitled to
We're
that
not
No
obligating
obligation
anybody
to
to
die.
die. We're
The
not
legality
You're
of
obligating.
not obligating
euthanasia
We're
is
not
anybody. It's
simply
their
obligating
a
choice.
anybody
very
to
choice.
die who
heavily
is terminally
infringing
ill.
Their
We're
on
just
choice.
giving them a
the
But
doing exactly
privacy
necessary
or
that.
wish to
human
may die
Delegates,
right that they
delegates,
have.
but
after
delegates,
proper
euthanasia is
legal
more
delegates,
about
procedure.
giving
delegates,
choice to
delegates,
people.
one by one. I can't hear anyone like this. I think a more pertinent question is what the status of life becomes under euthanasia. Do you simply limit life, or do you simply limit its jurisdiction to people who have the capability to undergo what is defined as a fulsome and wholesome life, or do you extend its boundaries to even people who, like the delegate of United States mentioned, may not be having the most ideal of physical or mental conditions, but still deserve a chance to whatever chance at life they get?
I
What is
agree
the
with that
It's
definition of
not
statement
about
And
people
like
because
having
it
It's
choice.
their
devalues some
choice.
life.
Stephen Hawking
People,
Even
chose.
someone who
that
wants
allowing
to use
circumstances.
that
How many years do you
opportunity.
know like
Person who
Stephen
is
Hawking?
terminally ill
if
is not
euthanasia
obligated to
is
die.
You need
allowed,
to,
That's his
Look,
choice.
delegates, you
let
need
them
to pay
die when
attention to the
better.
fact
just
that
because the
euthanasia
person is
also sets a
mentally
very
sick
Or
or
strong
disabled.
disabled, you
precedent
cannot take away their life and
for
Euthanasia has
people who
never
might
been
be
against
perfectly able as well
specific
if they
people.
might
It's their choice.
there is always hope for them to improve, for them to do
There is
something
always
better.
palliative
delegate
care, and it's not
Exactly.
I'm
that
Doctors
sorry.
need to
disabled people do
confirm
not
that.
want to
delegate for
live.
somebody who
All
might
disabled
be
people
Like
do
delegate for somebody
enjoy
who
chronic
might be
living.
lung
having
disease, you have
depression
no
or
choice
There are
but
anxiety or
people
some
who
sort
there's
of
would
very
only
depressive
like
state in
an
their
extreme
life.
to
financial
If they
live
believe
their
strain.
that their
life.
life cannot progress from that point on, they will believe that they, I don't know, in some extreme situation, they might think that they need to die, whereas things can look up. Definitely. There are so many people who have survived depression and anxiety from
No
extremely
one wants
believe that they
euthanasia
are
based on
It's their
depression,
Depression and
right?
choice.
anxiety are
If
I'm
they
not
talking
can't
about
A
take the
very
physical
pain,
simple
the
terminally
question.
ill
mental pain,
We are
conditions.
talking about terminally ill people.
and
Delegates, just one
the
simple
human
question.
race is
Although
extremely
Let's not
Terminally
resilient.
ill
I think
people
we're
also have a
absolutely
right to
the
just
live.
one
species
question. I
species
have
of
one question
resilience
posed
when
to
it
you
comes
guys.
to
Have a right
All
to
terminally
those,
live.
all those
Ask you how
endorsing,
we
all those
justify
endorsing
got
giving
euthanasia,
terminally
all those endorsing
ill,
euthanasia,
there's
your
no
countries, your
cure
respective
whatsoever. Please do
countries
not
are
confuse
against capital
anxiety and
punishment,
depression with
right?
euthanasia.
Why? Because it
I'm
believes that
not
there is a
accusing
chance for
anxiety and
reform.
depression. This
Now,
is about the precedent it sets for other
why
people.
don't you apply that
that's why
logic,
the
that
medical
same logic
authorities check
to
it.
euthanize victims, that they can still have a
Delegate, I'm
shorter
so
life, they can
sorry
still
to
have an
interrupt.
improved
Delegate,
quality of life.
Delegate, what is the point you're trying to make?
Delegate Luxembourg, the international press has a few questions for you. We'll start with
Freeman. Okay.
Srimai, and then Arushi can also ask.
I have a question for those of you in favor of euthanasia. So, how can you ensure that this respect for autonomy doesn't escalate into organized crime, state sponsored suicide, murder, or especially like minorities in countries, take like the LGBT community, take religious minorities like Muslims in India? How can you ensure, even if you have like doctors, you have psychologists like I think the delegate of Netherlands or Belgium mentioned, and even in countries, third world countries, that we do not have adequate resources, we do not have adequate medical care. People, even financially independent people, cannot afford therapy in a lot of situations. How can you ensure that the situation like this does not take place?
Journalist, may I answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
So that's an excellent question, first of all. And what I'd like to say to that is all of this for the countries that consider it acceptable has already been discussed. So So apart from the physicians, there are two witnesses that have no legal or financial attachment to the patient to confirm that the person is both willing and in a mental state to agree to assisted dying.
Journalist,
There
I
are
would.
provisions clearly stated for
The
assisted
proper legal procedures where both the patient and the family members need to agree to that. and
Yeah,
moreover the
assisted
patient needs to
suicides.
repetitively state it, and he's
Family members can
constantly
definitely
under.
have a very dual
Can't
stance in this
family
matter.
I'm
members
sorry,
What if some
medical
family
decide
members
his
authorities are
are
life?
also
set in
there.
line to inherit a lot of
Especially
money or a lot
in
of
You
conditions
can't
management
where there is a
versus
lot of
Constantly
going to
financial
stated,
die.
and
So
So
he's
constraints.
if
already
delegates,
you
have
pick
you
he's in
one
considered the
monitored
person
by
to
his
die,
socio-economic
then
status of the family
we
and the
have an
nation if
opposite
you want
stance
to
on this matter,
legalize
and I don't
euthanasia?
think so
The point is
that's a way to
self-determination. Now,
justify it.
Let's hear out the representative from China. Let's hear him out. Let him give his.
Delegates supporting legalization of euthanasia, have you considered the socio-economic status of the nations? For example, developing nations where the common mindset of families is to get rid of family members who would prove to be a burden on the family. Have you thought
I,
about that?
I get your
The
point,
countries
and
who
And
have
how they might want
legalized.
to
Not
that's
just
inherit
why
family
assets from
members.
you need
people
medical
who are
authorities.
terribly
Have a
You
cruel,
very
can't
Must be
you can't
and can
suffering
then
from
die
unbearable
because of
administer
physical
euthanasia.
pain.
any
authority
drugs
should
without
You
the
keep raising
allow
the
And
point
people
of
to
medical
the
know
major
authorization
that
of
it's
a
conditions for
medical
Yes, you
euthanasia to
need
authority.
medical
actually
very
take
authority,
risky to
place
but
die
then you
because
would
of
is
not be
that
Sorry,
death
euthanasia.
must
considering.
be
is
inevitable.
every medical
All right, wait.
authority
Yeah,
Delegate,
but
someone
one
who
of the
$20
belongs?
conditions for
fine.
Medical
euthanasia to
authorities can
actually
be
take place is
mobilized
that
to
death
take
Delegates,
should
care
be
of
inevitable.
delegates. This is
influence.
a
That
digression from what the question he asked
In
is. The
near.
question that he's asked is that the developing countries have socioeconomic state have a there are certain groups with such socioeconomic status, and this is something that the journalist also brought up, that there are countries where the socioeconomic status is such of certain groups that they come into that they come into life with all perceptions already swirling around them of their irrelevance, of them being anti-national, of them being something, of them being worthless to the nation, and in a situation where they can't seem to carve out an independent identity for themselves, they can't prove their worth. How do you justify how do you justify and how do you make the process of euthanasia safer for them?
Like you said, it is a social issue and it's a political issue as well. Euthanasia is nothing but a medical issue where like I've
it is a
repeatedly
legal
said, you
issue as well,
need the
delegate. It is a legal
Euthanasia
issue
is
as
actually
well.
a lot
medical
more than a
authorities.
medical
No,
issue.
it's not just a medical
Person
issue.
must
It's
be
a
It's
lot
something
suffering
more
from
which
than
is
medical
very,
issue.
Euthanasia,
death.
And
as
it
you
doesn't only
said,
affect one
delegate,
person,
He's
it
is
at the
affects
point
related to
that
right to
multiple
life
people.
and
No,
right
it
to
is a,
die.
he could die
exactly, it's a
without
legal
losing
issue
his
as
life
well.
to
You
die with
I
cannot
wouldn't call
dignity.
it
make this
a
into
medical
a
issue.
medical
Delegate,
issue.
Not
It could be
it's
a religious
something
issue
that
as
you
well.
just
We're not
can't
How
answering the
could it be a
medical
question.
religious
issue and
It's
issue?
not see the
We're
sentimental.
not
How can
we're
you
not
ethical
answering the
dilemmas it
question.
faces.
We're not answering the question. We still haven't addressed what the moderator brought up. That is how it affects socially disadvantaged groups. And the answer to that would be perhaps, at least in Canada, the request has to be entirely voluntary from the person with approval from trained professionals who have dedicated their lives to study this aspect of everybody's life. And apart from that, in Canada at least, other options have to be made available and the patient has to be made aware of them to finally make
A
that
similar
choice.
procedure is
So
carried out in countries like Netherlands,
Yes,
where
in
the
Moreover, one
Netherlands.
of the
patient has to be
legalities
made
with
to be
Delegates,
aware
kindly
of
euthanasia,
the
take notice
condition
that
of
delegate,
these
the process
countries are
of
highly
all
developed
the
one of the
economies and have a strong welfare system.
Also,
They are not
delegate,
like
there
But
is
countries
what
like
about
one
third
India.
world
aspect of
it
countries?
this
is
What
that
about
the
countries that
delegate.
physician
don't
is
have
always
enough
required to discuss
Delegates,
all
What
other
about
therapeutic
developing countries where
possibilities.
there's
delegates,
always a
Raise the
shortage of
point.
money?
Physician is
Delegate,
always
honestly,
required to
are you
discuss
in
all
favor
other
of
therapeutic possibilities.
delegates.
raise the point of
Discussing
the right of
therapeutic
self-determination.
possibilities is
However, you
not
fail to answer
determining
my
that they're
Physician is
question.
aware of
Delegates,
all
What
other
is the
Delegate
right to
Viran, can you
possibilities.
abortion
please
of
let the
consent?
delegate
It's
of
not
Saudi
something which
Arabia
is done
finish?
impulsively.
Can we
delegates,
listen to the
one second.
moderator?
Delegates, one second. There is one aspect of this debate which all of us have largely ignored. Uh, it is the concept of neonatal euthanasia. If you guys are not familiar with it, I will inform you about it. Neonatal euthanasia refers to euthanizing newborn children who have a very poor prognosis for the quality of life in their future. All right. So now, considering you have not even given that child a chance at life, you have not even given him the opportunity to experience the world around him, what sort of stances do your nations have on addressing that? That you have not given him a chance, he has not made any voluntary decision. He cannot be said to have gone through a process by which he arrives at a voluntary decision because he has not experienced the world around him. So yeah, delegate of
So at
Switzerland.
least for the
In
initial
Switzerland,
16 to
the
18
Delegate of
entire
years, the
Switzerland.
parents are
Delegate of
responsible for the
Switzerland.
child.
Delegate of Switzerland.
Delegate of Switzerland. He raised
in
his hand.
Switzerland, the entire decision rests on an adult person who has no mental disease. So in Switzerland, euthanasia cannot be done on infants infants or newborn babies, as we cannot make a decision about their life. And this is only allowed in cases when they are about to die in the next few days or hours when they are allowed to pull the plug for newborn babies.
Moderator, with all due respect, by that logic, you should also make abortions illegal because you're taking the life of an
Exactly.
infant.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Saying that
The
that's not
delegate,
giving the person a chance to live. When he's being born, he has the right to live, experience the world. You cannot take away.
Delegate,
And
Determine,
so
the delegate
child's
of
In a
life,
Saudi
lot of
Arabia
nations,
gives a
children
very
also
why
have
do you
the
want him to
Thing
suffer?
that you're not
life.
Why do you
realizing
want
that
him
it
to
is an
suffer?
point
irreversible
is
That's
that
action.
Abortion
You can
of
give
a
him a better
policy
life.
can
It
be
is being
logic.
misused
protested
by
by
Because you
doctors. It is
have
Him
the
wrong
and his
for
example
them.
family
of
to
Stephen
suffer.
Hawking
Denying
doesn't mean you
abortion,
make
denying abortion, you're denying the right to life to fetuses who don't have a brain yet,
exactly.
who
They don't
can't
have
feel
a
anything
voice.
yet. How do you
I'd
compare
request
that to a
Iran to
living
not say
baby
against
who
abortion.
has senses, who can feel pain? How do you draw a comparison between the two?
also to what
So
the delegate of
No,
absolutely.
we
Switzerland
cannot.
said,
Switzerland
there
with
has to be an adult
euthanasia in
that
infants
makes
and
a decision for a child that you believe should be dead.
There
Correct.
is a proper,
Now, in a lot
there is
of
a proper
nations, there's a lot of stigma around girls as the weaker sex, and that there may be their parents. There may be many adults, perfectly mentally sane adults, who think that women definitely don't deserve the right to live. So obviously, kill them off. Euthanasia, easy result,
Delegate, if
right?
I
but
may,
a doctor
Euthanasia
would
requires
definitely
euthanasia.
not
an
suggest the
authority.
legal system
euthanasia
of
is
the
for
country would
An
medical
not
authority
suggest
allow
conditions.
it.
It's
that.
not
yeah.
related to gender. Do not confuse the two.
But
It's not
by
related to gender.
but by
But
It's a
legalizing
terminal
we can
illness.
euthanasia,
definitely
you're
influence
giving the
euthanasia.
parents a
Just we have
chance
to
to
acknowledge
misuse
that.
that
The
So, but
policy.
flexibility
developed,
of
You
not
abortion
you
in
is
can't.
developing
flexibility.
What's
nations.
the difference between
Isn't
abortion and
euthanasia just an easy option to
neonatal abortion?
eliminate the female
You are
fetus?
killing a
Exactly.
person,
Euthanasia,
a fetus,
Exactly.
a
It's
child
not
provides
who
even a
has
viable
validates
option.
social
experienced
stigma.
pain, who
There
has
is no
Why
senses.
terminally
would
ill
a
disease
physician
involved.
or a
There
legal
is no
person
doctor or physician
Legalization
involved.
of
sir,
euthanasia is basically giving misusers a legal consent to do any
Delegate, if
malpractice
I
they
sir,
may,
want.
so
We
is
don't have
Validating
a
abortion.
strong
It's a
legal
proper
system.
legal
Whatever
procedure you
can
need
giving
go
to go
ahead.
yourself
through.
a legal answer to social stigma.
no, a
True.
foreseeable death
I
is
think you should refer to
necessary.
the legal procedures that have been already laid.
What if palliative care is available? What if there is a
Isn't
chance? What if the
Palliative
process
care
is
cannot
going
be
wrong?
The
effective in
most
every
Isn't the
case.
in most
irreversible
cases,
action?
the
delegate
palliative
is
But
care,
correct.
euthanasia is no
palliative
There are
obligation.
sedation.
some who are
Even
expected
euthanasia
to
will
Euthanasia
die
is
in
happen in
always
just
a
every
6
choice.
case in
months.
But don't
fact.
you
In the
think there is a
Euthanasia is
certain
constitution,
always
pressure,
a
But
choice.
especially
killing
in
a
developing
child when
countries?
he's
Palliative
born
care
is
is
Understand
not
not
the
a
possible in
choice.
suffering
You
in
every
are
case.
not
developing
Is a
giving
countries.
him
Don't
a
you
choice
think the
for
choice.
families
misusers
will
Palliative
be
care
also.
is
burdened a
not
little?
possible in every case.
But killing a
neither
child
is
who's just
neither
been
is euthanasia the
born is
benefit of
just
some
wrong. You're
people.
not
How do
giving
you
them a
create
What
voice.
if
You're not
acknowledge
giving them
what
a
that
if
chance
it
to
choice?
just
live.
How
has
do
a
you create
lifespan
a
of a
law?
few
It's a
hours or a
How
choice.
few
do
We're
days
you
not
where it is
obligating
No,
just
it's
going
anybody
to
to
have to
parents'
die.
live in
choice.
a
where
surety
it has
to
Whose
to
it?
life
go and live
is
in
the
pain?
point.
There is
Would
a
you
Well, the
rather
patient needs to
There's a
agree
rather
to
so
it.
hurt
in
a
Colombia,
child?
as you
It's
just pointed
choice.
out,
Go
what
on,
if
there are
the
delegate,
so many
child only
cases
has
delegate,
a
in
few
which
hours to
small
delegate,
live?
children
Why
would
don't you
definitely
live
only a
delegate,
few
the
hours,
child
but
Just
yeah,
please
delegate,
live
calm
for
stop.
down.
hours?
which
Let's
may have
stop.
been
Delegate,
considered
stop.
Point of
Delegate,
euthanasia
stop.
in that
We,
case.
we,
Can you
child.
please calm down and allow your
we,
moderator to speak?
we'll go one by one. We'll go the delegate of Saudi Arabia, your take on this, followed by delegate of United States, followed by the delegate of Colombia.
I'm
All
so
right.
sorry to interrupt. We'll be entertaining questions from the members of the press now. We'll go with um, member of the IP, Manya Chaturvedi first.
So to the delegate of Saudi Arabia, you said that palliative care is available. So, and you based that as a reason to illegalize euthanasia. But palliative care is not accessible to everyone. It's not available everywhere, and it is not 100% effective. So how can you illegalize euthanasia, which can be a which can bring so much relief to people who do not have access to palliative care, because on the chance that palliative care might work out.
Considering that, considering that palliative care is not available everywhere, euthanasia is not something that you can use instead of palliative care. Instead of making euthanasia legal, why don't they provide palliative care in countries where it is not exactly available? There are many reasons for which people go for euthanasia. They are scared of pain, or they are scared that they will be dependent. They are scared that they don't have any home care. They are scared that they will lose their alertness and they won't be able to, they want to die
Not so
while they
simple to
still can,
die by
communicate with their
Adding to
families. There
what
are many
the delegate
reasons.
of Saudi Arabia just said,
it's not so
90%
simple to
people
die by
who right reasons for
there's a proper legal
euthanasia is
procedure you need to go through.
loss of
It's not just you
self
We
walk
just
into
pointed
autonomy.
out
Yeah,
the
to
hospital
legal
and
come
say,
to
I
route.
want to
the
die.
delegates,
All right.
delegate,
Then Delegate of Luxembourg.
we had to come to the delegate of USA, after Saudi Arabia, and after that Colombia. Then you can resume your discussion.
So to state my thoughts on this, I also we have to also acknowledge the kind of precedent that euthanasia sets. Now, I'm sure that its origins, its beginnings are absolutely, they're absolutely noble and right to self-determination, and you get to determine the way you live. But what is the right to death can easily become the duty to death. So what about old people who do not easily get a chance to express whether they want to live longer or whether they have more zest for life left in them? What if their families think that it's a burden to have an old person in the house because they may not be in the best physical or mental condition? So how do you get to decide for those people? So
Moderator, may I comment?
maybe that can create its own stigma. You're
So,
talking about the potential of creating
Euthanasia is
your
only
own.
performed when the person is terminally ill and there is death is inevitable and near. When the person is about to die, immediately
right,
die.
a
It's not about
foreseeable
old people.
death
Yeah,
is
and
Even
necessary.
if the
inevitably
death
always.
is inevitable, what if the
And there
person
needs to
wants
be
to live? What if
unbearable
if there is
physical
a
pain.
willingness to live?
There is a degree to
Isn't
pain.
that also the right to
There's no way,
self-determination?
there's no way
Person is
to
on his
know for
deathbed
sure
almost.
that there is a
If
foreseeable
a
death.
person is
Even
almost on his
even in
deathbed, why don't
diagnosis
you let
of
him live for
sure
those
short
last
death, there is
days?
Why do you
always
want to make
there is
him
always
suffer? Why do you
hope
want to
for a
make him
comeback.
suffer
Exactly.
first?
If they
Delegate of
want to
Why
Luxembourg,
do
live,
you
you
want
just
to
said
make his
immediate
family
death.
suffer? Why do
Because
you
he
want to
is the
strain
burden
down
of
their
the
Why would you
family
want them
as
to
he
mental
has
die?
a
resources?
duty
Why would
to
you want them
die.
to die?
Comes in.
It's his own right. He has the
Why would
autonomy
you
to die.
why
The
Delegate,
delegate
Right
of
to
USA
why
just
would
pointed out that the burden that the
right to
individual will feel
die
that
with
he has to
dignity.
die as a duty because the
But the
resources
family
No,
and the
it's no
can't
financial
duty. It's
assistance
no
force
needed
duty.
for
the
keeping him
It's
family
an
alive
can't
for a
option.
force
It's
few
an
that.
days is
option.
not necessary.
Delegate of
He is
Luxembourg,
obligated to
maybe
die
I
by
acknowledge
euthanasia
what
if they're
you're trying to
medically ill.
say.
It's
I
an
absolutely
option.
acknowledge what
There's
you're
no
trying to say.
obligation.
I mean, listen,
All right, delegates. Now let
There are
me
many.
delegates. Now let me rephrase what she was saying. The question she's asking is not whether you have the right to take your life or whether you don't have the right to take your life. The question she's asking is that when you see other people taking their euthanizing themselves in situations similar to yours, there is a social necessity created, and you start feeling the duty to do the same, even though before that social necessity was created, you may not have felt the same way. So she's talking about such precedents being created, and and therefore she's saying that this would lead to a disruption in your voluntary process by which you arrive at euthanizing yourself. Right, delegate from Luxembourg, you can respond to that. You can respond to that, delegate from Luxembourg now.
You can unmute yourself, delegate.
Delegate, do you want to speak? You can unmute yourselves now.
I think he's facing technical issues. Um, Till then, anyone else can unmute themselves and make a point.
Delegate from Colombia.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to make sure there is a very close line between anything and euthanasia. It can be murder, it can be suicide, it could be a drug overdose, it could be an assisted suicide. There are many things. It's very important to identify what is a euthanasia, and for that you need a good and efficient legal system which identifies all the points.
So
I
you
wanted
would
to
be
say
using
we
your
have
legal
regular sitting with
system to determine
psychiatrists.
that fine line rather than
Uh,
putting the manpower into something useful.
I wanted to say that there are
We
regular
just
sittings
want
with
our
psychiatrists and
citizens
they're
to
properly
die in
consulted.
peace.
Moreover,
Delegates
physicians
from
are always required to introduce all
Delegate of
possible
Colombia, you
therapeutic
want your citizens
possibilities
to
with the
die in
patient
peace, not live
and
Delegate
in
the
of
peace.
China,
family.
can we please let the
So
I'm
delegate from
there
sorry
China
is
finish?
if they are in
so there
pain
is no
and
force
they.
in.
Please
Delegate of
continue. My
Luxembourg, please continue.
apologies.
I finished. I finished my sentence.
Delegate of
So
Colombia, please go ahead.
yeah, I was saying that you said that instead of living in peace, you die in peace. People only come to die in peace when they can't live in peace. They
All
are in
right.
poverty. They live in slums. They can't manage their
We're
home.
determining the
They
right to death by
their
All right,
socioeconomic
their
status.
life their
That's a very subjective
can you
by
even
statement to
Delegate of
make,
imagine
Juliet.
delegate.
When she says that there would be a
a
precedent
person with
created where
brain
there
tumor?
would be
He
social
can't
need.
remember
There would be
anything.
social need for old people
Delegate
to
by
die.
the
Don't you think
introduction
this
of the
Like the
legalization of
delegate of
euthanasia.
Netherlands
moderator,
Yeah.
permission to speak.
Let the delegate of Netherlands complete, then we come to the delegate of China and the delegate of Switzerland.
Right. So you said that there would be a social burden on these people created to kill themselves. Don't you think this argument is even stronger the other way, where people who are living in greed, people who are living in unmeasurable pain, will be forced to live because they are seeing people who are brave enough to to decide that they don't want to die through the
We have
process of
psychiatrists
euthanasia,
for
because
that. We
that
have
would be seen
psychiatrists.
because that would be seen as something that is cowardly in nature. I feel that this is a much
Psychiatrists.
more harmful precedent that you set in society, where people are being forced to live when they do not feel the necessity to live. Uh, when they do not feel the necessity to live. I think that pretty much sums up.
Sir, I would
Delegate,
like to
look at
Dying
your
with no
bigger
reiterate that
active
the
picture.
patient's
Moderator,
request
permission
for
to speak?
euthanasia is mostly a cry for help, implying that the life is not worth living now, but could be worth living if various symptoms of fear were managed. The patient is almost always depressed and believes that things are much worse than they actually are. Patients are confused and are unable to make sensible judgments,
Delegate,
even
if
if
I may, even if
Psychiatrists,
the
we have
patient
doctors to
requests
advise
evaluations
them.
deem them
two
psychologically
witnesses,
fit.
Euthanasia is the
If you
last
prefer
resort.
suicide
Euthanasia is the
instead,
last
The
resort.
delegate of Switzerland wanted to say something. Can we
Yes,
please?
I just wanted to address all the delegates by saying that there is no simple yes or no answer to euthanasia. We cannot compare the conditions in developing and developed countries and form a uniform policy for across the world. For example, in India, where females are not as respected and are not considered quite worthy by society, detecting the sex of an unborn child is illegal. However, in other countries, it is not. So we cannot make a universal law by saying that, oh, that in countries where a certain minority is oppressed, then we should not have euthanasia at all in the world, because that minority may be made to feel worthless. And I also want to say that we are not, Switzerland does not support infant euthanasia as well as euthanasia in people with mental illnesses.
Delegate, the simple
All
answer to
right,
your question
delegates,
is
we are about
euthanasia is a
our
law.
time is about to
Be it
elapse. We'll take questions from the international press once, after which we'll try and wrap this up. Yeah, members from the
Arushi Bawa, do you have any questions for the delegate? Um, Journalist, you're not audible. Um, no, journalist, you're not audible. I think she's facing some technical issues.
I think there's a problem with the
You
ears.
can try sending
She
the
could try
question through chat.
disconnecting her earphones. So straight on the computer audio.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
So my question was that the fine line between the matter of the fine line came in between just now. So how do you decide, and who is the one who will get to decide which side of that fine line do you take? Like for example, say there's a person who's probably brain dead, and they've been suffering for probably a year or two because of that, and after that the family continues to want them to live, but technically isn't that person still suffering? So how do you decide when do you not
All
end their
right.
life? And
That's
In
not
response to that
volunteering
question,
euthanasia.
I would like to say that this problem can be solved through strong and effective legislation, such as where we explicitly recognize the validity of things such as a written declaration or a will. So this is extended to people who are in coma, so people who are unable to state whether they are state whether they want to be euthanized, but have previously expressed the desire in a written document. So I don't think that point holds, that people won't be able to express themselves, because such policies are already being implemented in countries such as the Netherlands, where
Can I please
there's
oppose that?
Belgium,
absolute
Sir,
Netherlands,
recognition of the
Canada,
validity of something such as
Luxembourg.
a will.
Can
sir,
I say
how can you justify saying that a person who's writing that will at that point of time, that person is not facing any, psychological
What if
condition, is
There's a
not
proper
feeling
set of
the
burdened,
brain
is
procedures we
not
changes
need
feeling
to
we need
their
to go
what
person
through.
is
their will has
pressured
changed?
at
even
that
again,
moment when
delegate
the person is
Certain sets of
suffering.
procedures we need to
They
go
might
through.
feel that they are
feel that
burdening
those
their
that
family.
those
Again, I'm
practices,
bringing
that
back
those
this point that
contributions
can
are
lead to a
not
pressure
accurate.
because of which they
Those are
agree to
not
All
this
right,
accurate.
I
Delegate,
Your
the
think this
life,
is
patient.
euthanasia.
your
All right,
basic
I think this is a good
delegate?
time to wrap up
I will
this
just
news panel. I thank all of you for attending this. This was a very interesting debate, and I'm sure all of you have prior commitments, and which is why unfortunately we'll have to end right now. I'm sorry for the delay we faced in starting the panel. I think this was a very enriching experience. So yeah, the conclusions of the debate can be summed up that Euthanasia still remains a debatable topic. I think each and every one of you has put forward your views very aggressively, and I think our viewers will have some sort of opinion, if not a biased one to one side, but at least some sort of information, relevant information regarding this topic. Thank you everyone for attending.
Informed. I personally extremely enjoyed the debate, and I hope it was the same for you. I think it was a really good experience for everyone. Great job. All of you did really well. And with this, we end the news panel. The results will be declared in 15 to 20 minutes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
delegates.
You have to join a meeting.
Thank you.